She pretended to be ugly for 3 years to avoid marriage, but the Duke saw through her lie. There are secrets that bind us, lies that protect us, and truths that can destroy everything we've carefully built. For 3 years, she hid beneath a veil, a ghost in her own life, invisible to the world that sought to claim her. But some men see beyond fabric and shadow. Some men see straight into the soul. And when a duke with eyes like winter frost decides to uncover the truth, no disguise, no matter how carefully crafted, can survive his scrutiny. If you're ready to witness a story of deception, desire, and the dangerous game between hiding and being seen, subscribe now and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. This is a journey you won't want to miss. The morning mist clung to Ashworth Manor like a silk shroud, thick and grey and suffocating. Victoria Ashworth stood at her chamber window, her fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching the carriages arrive one by one through the iron gates below. They came bearing lords and ladies, mothers with unmarried daughters, fortune hunters with polished boots and empty pockets. They came for the house party her father had insisted upon, 3 weeks of carefully orchestrated social torture designed for one purpose only, to find her a husband. Her stomach twisted. The familiar weight of dread settled over her shoulders like a winter cloak. Behind her, the door creaked open. Martha, her lady's maid and only true confidant, entered carrying the veil. The veil. That cursed, blessed piece of black lace that had become both her prison and her salvation. "It's time, miss," Martha said softly, her weathered face creased with concern she no longer bothered to hide. Victoria turned from the window. Her reflection caught in the standing mirror across the room, a young woman of 22 with pale skin that seemed to glow in the dim morning light, eyes the color of summer sky, clear and bright and infinitely sad. Her hair fell in soft waves of golden brown, the kind poets wrote about, the kind men noticed, the kind that made her father see only dowries and advantageous matches. She hated it, every beautiful inch of herself. Beauty was a currency she never asked to possess, a burden that had brought nothing but unwanted attention since her 16th birthday. "Help me," she whispered. Martha approached, and together they began the ritual they'd perfected over 3 long years. First the powder, ash and chalk mixed carefully to dull the luminosity of Victoria's skin. Then the veil itself, layers of black lace so thick it obscured her features completely, transforming her into a shadowed figure, something neither quite human nor quite spectre. A creature of mystery that invited pity rather than desire. The transformation was complete. In the mirror, Hannah of the Veil stared back at her, the name whispered in drawing rooms and behind gloved hands. The tragic Miss Ashworth, disfigured in childhood by some unnamed tragedy, too shy to show her face, too delicate to speak above a whisper. A lie so elaborate it had taken on a life of its own. "Your father wants you in the drawing room within the hour," Martha said, adjusting the veil's drape. "The guests are gathering." "Who has arrived?" Victoria's voice came muffled through the fabric, small and uncertain, exactly as she'd trained it to sound. "The usual families. The Ashtons, the Pembrokes. Lord Whitley brought his 3 sons." Martha hesitated. "And the Duke of Thornfield arrived this morning." Unannounced. Victoria's breath caught. The Duke of Thornfield. James Blackwood. Even hidden away as she was, she'd heard the stories. A man carved from granite and cold ambition. A war hero turned reclusive lord, notoriously uninterested in marriage or society or anything that didn't serve his carefully controlled existence. 30 years old, impossibly wealthy, and according to every gossip column in London, colder than a winter grave. "Why would he come here?" she asked. Martha's expression darkened. "That, miss, is the question everyone's asking." The drawing room buzzed with manufactured gaiety, laughter too bright, conversations too loud, the desperate performance of families jockeying for social position. Victoria entered slowly, a shadow at the periphery, and immediately the room's energy shifted. Conversations stuttered, eyes darted away. The discomfort was palpable, a living thing that pressed against her skin. Good. She made her way to the corner seat by the window, the position she always claimed, and settled into near invisibility. From here she could observe without participating, exist without being truly seen. It was a kind of freedom, she'd learned, the freedom of erasure. "Poor thing," someone whispered. Lady Pembroke, if Victoria recognized the voice correctly. 3 years hidden away, what a waste. A mercy, really, another replied. Imagine being seen in that condition. Victoria's fingers curled into her palms. She'd stopped flinching at the whispers 2 years ago. Now they simply washed over her, meaningless as rain. The drawing room doors opened again and the air itself seemed to change, to sharpen, to grow colder. Conversations died mid-sentence. Teacups paused halfway to lips. The Duke of Thornfield had entered. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered and lean in a way that spoke of physical power held in rigid check. His coat was midnight blue, perfectly tailored, no decoration save simple gold buttons. His hair was dark as ink, slightly too long, brushing the collar of his shirt. But it was his face that arrested attention, all hard angles and sharp planes, a jaw that could have been carved from marble, and eyes. His eyes, grey as winter storms, cold as Arctic ice, and currently, unnervingly, fixed directly on her. Victoria's breath stopped. She sat perfectly still, every instinct screaming at her to look away, to shrink further into her corner, to become even more invisible than she already was. But something held her frozen. Those eyes, they didn't just look at her, they saw through her, past the veil, past the performance, straight into the terrified, hidden part of herself she'd buried 3 years ago. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Surely he couldn't actually see her. The veil was too thick, the shadows too deep. And yet, the Duke's gaze lingered for one more impossible moment. Then, with deliberate precision, he looked away, turning to greet her father with the perfunctory courtesy of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. But the damage was done. Victoria's hands trembled in her lap. Her breath came shallow and quick through the lace that separated her from the world. Something had shifted. Something dangerous and inevitable, like the first crack in winter ice before the whole surface shatters. She told herself it meant nothing, that she'd imagined the intensity of that look, that a man like the Duke of Thornfield would never spare a second thought for Hannah of the Vale, the ghost girl, the figure of pity hidden in corners. But deep down, in the place where truth lived regardless of how many lies she told, Victoria knew. He'd seen her, really seen her. And her carefully constructed world had just become exponentially more dangerous. Dinner was an exercise in endurance. Victoria sat at the far end of the table, positioned, as always, where the candlelight barely reached, where she could remain a shadowy presence that people acknowledged with uncomfortable nods, before quickly looking elsewhere. The meal progressed with agonizing slowness. 7 courses of food she couldn't properly eat through her veil, conversation that swirled around her like water around a stone, laughter that never included her. She'd learned to eat earlier, in her rooms, to sit through these dinners simply existing, a breathing reminder of tragedy that made everyone else's lives feel fortunate by comparison. "Tell me, Lord Ashworth," the Duke of Thornfield's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade through silk, "does your daughter not join us for meals?" The table fell silent. Forks lowered. Glasses paused mid-sip. Victoria's father cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the attention suddenly directed toward the family's carefully ignored secret. "My daughter is present, Your Grace." Her father gestured vaguely in Victoria's direction without actually looking at her. "Victoria prefers discretion." Discretion. The Duke repeated the word as though tasting it, finding it wanting. How peculiar. Victoria kept her head bowed, her hands folded in her lap, beneath the table where they wouldn't betray their trembling. Every instinct screamed at her to disappear, to somehow become even smaller, less noticeable. But she could feel his attention on her again, that same penetrating focus from the drawing room, and it pinned her in place like a butterfly on a collector's board. "Your Grace," her father began, with the desperate brightness of a man trying to redirect a dangerous conversation, "perhaps you'd enjoy discussing the hunting plans for tomorrow. The deer have been quite—" "I'm not interested in hunting," the Duke interrupted. His tone wasn't rude precisely, but it carried an absolute quality that made argument impossible. "I'm interested in understanding why a young woman of marriageable age hides beneath a veil at her own family's gathering." The words fell like stones into still water. Ripples of shock spread across the table, widened eyes exchanged glances, the barely suppressed excitement of gossips witnessing potential scandal. Victoria's chest tightened. Her breath came shallow. She should speak. Offer some excuse, maintain the performance. But her voice had fled, trapped somewhere between her lungs and her throat, suffocating beneath layers of lies. "My daughter suffered a tragic accident," her father said finally, his voice strained. "Years ago. She prefers not to—" "I wasn't addressing you, Lord Ashworth." The Duke's words were ice. "I was addressing your daughter." Every eye turned to Victoria. The weight of attention was crushing, physical, a pressure against her chest that made breathing nearly impossible. She'd successfully avoided direct conversation for 3 years, 3 years of careful invisibility, and now this man, this Duke, with his winter eyes and his ruthless directness, was demolishing her defenses with surgical precision. She had to speak. Silence would only create more suspicion. Her fingers twisted together beneath the table, nails digging into her palms hard enough to hurt. The pain helped. It gave her something to focus on besides the panic clawing at her throat. "I prefer privacy, Your Grace." The words came out barely above a whisper, muffled through the veil exactly as she'd practiced. Fragile, wounded, a voice designed to end conversations rather than invite them. "I hope you can understand. I can understand many things, Miss Ashworth." His voice remained level, but something in it had changed, sharpened. "What I struggle to understand is deception." The word hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Victoria's heart stopped, then started again, too fast, too hard, a frantic rhythm that surely everyone could hear. He couldn't know. It was impossible. The veil was perfect, her performance flawless. 3 years without a single person questioning the charade. And yet, "Your Grace," Lady Pembroke interjected nervously, "surely you don't mean to suggest—" "I suggest nothing," the Duke said, still looking directly at Victoria's position in the shadows. "I merely observe. And what I observe is interesting." Finally, mercifully, he looked away, turned his attention to his wineglass, took a slow sip. The conversation around the table resumed with desperate enthusiasm, everyone eager to move past the uncomfortable moment, to return to safer topics. But Victoria remained frozen. Her mind raced, spiraling through possibilities and fears. He suspected. She didn't know how, or why, or what had given her away. But he suspected. And a man like the Duke of Thornfield, with his reputation for ruthless intelligence and his complete disregard for social niceties, would not let suspicion rest. She was in danger. Real, immediate danger. Not physical, but the exposure of her secret would be its own kind of death. Her father would be furious. She'd be forced into whatever marriage he'd been planning all along. The freedom she'd fought so desperately to maintain would vanish like morning mist. The remainder of dinner passed in a blur. Victoria didn't taste the food she pretended to nibble, didn't hear the conversations swirling around her. All she could think about was escape, getting back to her rooms, to safety, to the one place where she could drop the performance and simply breathe. When the meal finally blessedly ended, she rose as quickly as decorum allowed, a shadow extracting itself from deeper shadows. She moved toward the door, desperate for the sanctuary of the upstairs hallway. "Miss Ashworth." His voice stopped her 3 steps from escape. She turned slowly, every muscle tense, and found the Duke of Thornfield standing directly in her path. Up close he was even more imposing, taller, broader, radiating a kind of controlled intensity that made the air around him feel charged with electricity. "Your Grace?" Her voice was barely audible. He studied her for a long moment. Those grey eyes moved across the veil as though he could see through the fabric to the face beneath, as though he was memorizing every hidden contour, every secret she'd worked so hard to keep. "You're afraid of me," he said finally. Not a question. A statement. "I'm afraid of many things, Your Grace, but not marriage, surely." A slight pause. "Unless, of course, you have reason to be." The words were innocuous enough on the surface, but beneath them ran a current of meaning, of implication, that made Victoria's skin prickle with warning. He was testing her, probing for weakness, searching for the crack in her armor. "I am not suited for marriage," she managed. "Because of your appearance?" He tilted his head slightly. "Or because of what revealing your appearance would mean?" Her heart slammed against her ribs. "I don't understand, Your Grace." "Don't you?" He stepped closer, not threatening precisely, but close enough that she could smell him. Sandalwood and leather, and something crisp like winter air. close enough that his presence filled her entire world, blocking out everything else. "I think you understand perfectly, Miss Ashworth. Or should I call you Hannah of the Vale? Which name is the lie, I wonder?" Panic flooded her system. She stepped back, her shoulders meeting the wall behind her. Trapped. He'd trapped her without ever touching her, with nothing but proximity and words and those terrible knowing eyes. "I think," she whispered, her voice shaking with genuine fear now, no performance required, "that you are mistaken, Your Grace." "Perhaps." He didn't sound convinced. "But I'm rarely wrong about such things. And I'm very, very patient." He stepped back, releasing her from the prison of his attention. "Sleep well, Miss Ashworth. I have a feeling the coming weeks will prove illuminating." Then he was gone, striding away down the corridor with the confidence of a man who'd already won a game she was only beginning to realize she was playing. Victoria stood frozen against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps behind her veil. Her hands shook. Her legs felt weak. 3 years. 3 years of perfect invisibility, shattered in a single evening. And the worst part, the truly terrifying part, was the small, traitorous spark of something that wasn't quite fear burning in her chest. Something that felt dangerously like excitement. She fled to her rooms before she could examine that feeling too closely, before she could acknowledge what it meant that part of her, some reckless, buried part, wanted to be seen by him. By those winter storm eyes that promised to strip away every lie and leave her standing naked in truth. Because being seen, she was learning, was the most dangerous temptation of all. Morning arrived with grey skies and the promise of rain. Victoria stood at her window, still in her nightgown, watching the gardens below slowly emerge from darkness. She hadn't slept. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen him. The Duke's face, those penetrating eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice, when he'd accused her of deception. He knew, or at least he suspected, and suspicion, in a man like that, was as dangerous as certainty. A knock at her door made her jump. Martha entered without waiting for permission, her expression grim. "Your father wants to see you, in his study, immediately." Dread pooled in Victoria's stomach. "Did he say why?" "The Duke requested a private meeting with him last night after dinner." Martha's hands twisted in her apron. "Miss, what did you say to His Grace?" "Nothing," Victoria whispered. "I said nothing. He—" She stopped, uncertain how to explain what had happened. How could she describe the way he'd looked at her? The way his words had peeled back her defenses like layers of skin? "He suspects, Martha. I don't know how, but he suspects." "Then we're done for," Martha said flatly. "If the Duke speaks to your father, if he convinces him to force you to remove the veil—" "He won't." Victoria's voice was stronger than she felt. "He can't. Not without proof. And he has no proof." She was trying to convince herself as much as Martha. "I'll speak with father. Smooth things over. It will be fine." But it didn't feel fine. As she dressed and affixed her veil, as she descended the stairs toward her father's study, everything inside her screamed that nothing would ever be fine again. Her father's study smelled of old leather and older tobacco. He sat behind his massive oak desk, his face flushed with either anger or excessive brandy, possibly both. When Victoria entered, he didn't rise, didn't even look up from the papers he was pretending to read. "Sit." She sat. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Victoria kept her hands folded, her posture perfect, her breathing steady. Years of training in deceit, in performance, in becoming whatever was necessary to survive, held her together when everything inside wanted to crack. "The Duke of Thornfield," her father said finally, "has made a most unusual request." Victoria's mouth went dry. "What kind of request, father?" "He wishes to court you." The words didn't make sense. Victoria sat perfectly still, certain she'd misheard. I'm sorry, what?" "Court you," her father repeated, and now he did look up, his eyes sharp with calculation. "He approached me last night, said he found you intriguing. Wants permission to spend time with you during the house party. Private walks. Supervised, of course, but—" He leaned back in his chair. "The Duke of Thornfield, Victoria. Do you understand what this means?" She understood perfectly. It meant exposure. It meant danger. It meant the Duke had found the most insidious possible way to unmask her, by getting close enough that she couldn't maintain the performance, by forcing intimacy that would inevitably reveal the truth. "I can't," she said. "Father, please, I can't." "You can and you will." His voice turned hard. "I've indulged this nonsense for 3 years, Victoria. 3 years of hiding, of embarrassing this family, of refusing every suitable match I've found. But the Duke of Thornfield?" He laughed, short and bitter. "Men like him don't offer interest in girls like you. Whatever game you're playing, whatever reason you think you have for this ridiculous charade, it ends now. If he wants to court you, you will allow it, graciously. And if I refuse," her father's expression went cold, "then I'll remove the veil myself, right here, right now, and you'll attend the rest of this house party exactly as you are. Let everyone see the truth of what you've been hiding." The threat hung between them. Victoria's hands clenched in her lap hard enough that her nails bit into her palms. He would do it. She could see in his eyes that he would absolutely do it, rip away her protection, her safety, her carefully constructed defense, and throw her to the wolves of society with no mercy whatsoever. At least with the Duke, she had time, a chance to maintain the deception a little longer. A possibility, however slim, of protecting her secret until she could find another escape. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "I'll allow him to court me." Her father smiled, satisfied. "Excellent. He'll meet you in the rose garden in an hour." "Don't embarrass me, Victoria." She rose on shaking legs and left the study before her father could see how close she was to breaking. In the hallway outside, she pressed her back against the wall and fought to control her breathing. An hour. She had an hour to prepare herself for whatever game the Duke of Thornfield was playing. Because it was a game. It had to be. Men like him didn't court women like Hannah of the Vale. They didn't request private walks with ghosts and shadows. He wanted something, wanted to prove something. And she was caught directly in the center of his machinations, with no clear path to escape. The rose garden was empty when Victoria arrived, mist still clinging to the carefully trimmed hedges and stone pathways. She walked slowly, trailing her fingers along the cold metal of the garden furniture, trying to steady herself. The morning air was sharp in her lungs. It helped. The physical sensation of cold gave her something concrete to focus on, besides her spiraling fear. "Miss Ashworth." She spun. The Duke of Thornfield stood at the garden's entrance, perfectly composed in his dark coat and severe expression. He'd approached without making a sound, or perhaps she'd been too lost in her own thoughts to notice. Either way, she was trapped again, alone with him in a space far too intimate, far too private. "Your Grace." She curtsied, buying herself a moment to gather her scattered thoughts. "My father said you wished to speak with me." "I do." He moved closer, his steps measured and deliberate. "Though perhaps speak with is optimistic, given your propensity for monosyllables and strategic silence." Despite her fear, something sparked in her chest. Irritation, maybe, or the dangerous urge to meet his challenge with one of her own. "I speak when I have something worth saying, Your Grace." "Do you?" His head tilted slightly, those grey eyes catching the weak morning light. "Then you must live in a world of profound boredom, given how rarely you seem to find speech necessary." It was a test. Everything with him was a test. Victoria forced herself to breathe slowly, to keep her voice soft and wounded, to maintain the performance even though every instinct screamed at her to snap back with the sharp wit she'd spent 3 years suppressing. "I find most conversations meaningless, Your Grace. Pleasantries designed to fill silence rather than communicate truth." "Interesting." He stopped a few feet away, close enough for conversation, but not so close as to be improper. Yet somehow his presence filled the entire garden, making the space feel smaller, more confined. "So you value truth? How ironic. I don't understand your meaning." "Don't you?" He studied her with that unnerving intensity. "You hide beneath a veil, speak in whispers, position yourself as a figure of tragic mystery, and yet you claim to value truth over pleasantries. It seems contradictory." Her heart raced. "My appearance is my truth, Your Grace. A difficult truth perhaps, but mine nonetheless." "Is it?" He took a single step closer. "Or is it merely another pleasantry, a different kind of conversation filler? A lie you tell because the real truth is far more inconvenient?" The words hit like physical blows. Victoria's breath caught. He was circling closer to the heart of it, stripping away her defenses with surgical precision, and she had no idea how to stop him without confirming every suspicion. "You don't know me," she said, and was horrified to hear her voice shake. "You have no right to make such accusations. You're correct, I don't know you." Something flickered in his expression, not quite softening but shifting somehow, "which is precisely why I've asked permission to court you, to know you. The real you, Miss Ashworth, not Hannah of the Vale, not this performance you've so carefully crafted, the woman beneath the lies." "There is no woman beneath." The words came out desperate, frightened. "This is all I am." "I don't believe you." "Then you're a fool, Your Grace." The moment the words left her mouth, Victoria realized her mistake. She'd responded with heat, with genuine emotion, with a sharpness that belonged to the real Victoria, not the timid, broken creature she'd been pretending to be. His eyes lit with something that might have been triumph, might have been satisfaction. "There," he said softly. That flash of spirit, that's real." She wanted to deny it, to retreat back into her careful performance. But something in his voice, in the way he was looking at her now, made her hesitate. There was no cruelty in his expression, no mockery. Instead, he looked almost gentle, as though he'd uncovered something precious rather than exposed something shameful. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "What do you want from me?" "Want?" He considered the question. "I want to understand why a young woman chooses invisibility over existence. I want to know what threat is so terrible that hiding becomes preferable to living. I want—" He stopped himself, drew in a slow breath. When he spoke again, his voice had lowered, become almost intimate. "I want you to trust me enough to tell me the truth." "You're a stranger," Victoria said. "Why would I trust you?" "Perhaps because I'm the first person in 3 years to actually see you." The words were quiet, devastating in their accuracy. "Everyone else looks at the veil. I look past it. And I believe, that some part of you wants to be seen. Really seen. Or you wouldn't be standing here right now having this conversation with me." He was right. The realization crashed over her like cold water. She could have refused, could have pleaded illness, hidden in her rooms, avoided him entirely. But some reckless, self-destructive part of her had wanted this, had walked into this garden knowing what he would do, what he would say, and had come anyway. Because being seen, truly seen, not pitied or dismissed or ignored, was a hunger she'd been starving for 3 years. "I don't know what you think you see," she said finally, "but you're mistaken." "Then prove it," he challenged. "Show me your face." The world stopped. Victoria's chest constricted. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at him through the layers of lace that suddenly felt impossibly thin. "No." "Why not? If you're truly disfigured as you claim, what difference does it make whether I see or not? One more person who knows the truth. Where's the harm?" "The harm," she said, her voice shaking, "is that it's mine. My truth. My face. Mine to show or hide as I choose, and I choose—" Her voice broke. "I choose to hide." For a long moment, he said nothing. Just looked at her with those winter-grey eyes that seemed to reach past every defense, straight into the terrified, desperate core of her. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well." His voice was soft. "But know this, Miss Ashworth. I will uncover your truth. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but I'm patient, and I'm persistent, and I don't surrender easily." He took a step back, releasing her from the intensity of his focus. "We'll take a walk tomorrow morning. Same time. Bring your secrets if you must, but know that I'm coming for them, every single one." Then he was gone, striding back toward the manor with the confidence of a man who'd already won. Victoria stood alone in the rose garden, trembling, terrified, and feeling more alive than she had in 3 years. The game had begun, and she had no idea how to win it. The next 3 days passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated encounters. Each morning, Victoria met the Duke in some corner of the estate. The rose garden, the library, the conservatory. Spaces carefully chosen by him to be private enough for real conversation, but public enough to maintain propriety. And each time, he dismantled another piece of her defenses. He didn't interrogate. That would have been easier to resist. Instead, he simply talked about books he'd read, places he'd traveled, observations about the other guests that made her laugh despite herself. He told her about the war, about the friends he'd lost, about the hollow feeling of surviving when so many others hadn't. He spoke with a brutal honesty that left her simultaneously defensive and disarmed. Because if he could be honest, how could she continue lying? "You think too much," he said on the fourth morning. They were walking the estate's perimeter, a path that circled through ancient oak trees and offered glimpses of the countryside beyond. Frost still clung to the grass despite the climbing sun. "I can see it. The way you pause before speaking, calculating every word." "Perhaps I'm simply careful," Victoria replied. "Or perhaps you're exhausted from maintaining a performance every waking moment." He glanced at her. That must be tiring, never being able to simply exist. It was tiring. So tiring she sometimes woke already exhausted, dreading another day of careful speech and calculated invisibility. But admitting that meant admitting the performance existed, meant stepping closer to the confession he was systematically extracting. "You assume much, Your Grace." "James," he corrected. "If we're going to have honest conversations, you should call me James." "We're not—" She stopped, drew a breath. "Your Grace, there are proprieties, which you've been violating spectacularly for 3 years by refusing to show your face in polite society." His tone was dry. "I think we're past propriety, don't you?" Despite herself, Victoria felt her lips curve behind the veil. He had a point. A frustrating, irritating, completely valid point. "Fine. James." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate, dangerous. "Though I still maintain you're making assumptions based on incomplete information." "Then give me complete information." "I can't. Can't or won't. Does it matter?" He stopped walking, turned to face her fully. They were deep in the tree line now, far from the manor, surrounded by ancient oaks that blocked the morning sun and created pockets of shadow and light. Private. Too private. Victoria's pulse quickened. "It matters," James said quietly, "because one suggests helplessness and the other suggests choice, and I think I know you're not helpless, Victoria." The sound of her name in his voice did something to her, made her chest tighten and her breath catch. He'd been calling her Miss Ashworth for days, maintaining formality even as everything else between them dissolved it. But now, with that single word, he'd crossed another line, made this more personal, more real. "You don't know anything about me," she whispered. "I know you're afraid." He stepped closer. Not threatening, but close enough that she could see the fine details of his face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the slight crookedness to his nose, suggesting it had been broken at least once, the way his jaw tightened when he was holding back words. "I know you've built a prison for yourself and convinced everyone, including yourself perhaps, that it's safety. I know you're brilliant and sharp-witted and wasted in shadows." "Stop." Her voice broke. "Please stop." "Why, because it's true? Because hearing it makes it harder to keep lying? Because—" The words caught in her throat. She couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think properly, couldn't maintain the careful distance she needed to survive this. "Because you're making everything complicated." "Good." His voice dropped lower, became almost intimate. "Simple would bore me, and I think it would bore you too." He was too close. She could smell him, that sandalwood and leather scent that had become dangerously familiar, could feel the heat of him despite the cold morning air, could hear every breath he took, steady and measured, while hers came shallow and quick. "I should go back," she managed. "This is inappropriate." "Is it?" "We're walking, chaperoned by 100 oak trees." But he stepped back anyway, giving her space to breathe. "Though if you want inappropriate, Victoria, you only need to ask." The words sent heat flooding through her. Not fear this time. Something far more dangerous. She should be offended, should retreat into wounded dignity, should do anything except stand here, feeling her pulse race with something that absolutely wasn't appropriate for a woman pretending to be a tragic invalid. "You're incorrigible," she said. "I'm persistent." He smiled then, a real smile, not the cold, social pleasantry she'd seen him use with others. It transformed his entire face, made him look younger, less severe, devastatingly attractive. "And I think you're starting to enjoy our conversations. Admit it." She shouldn't. Admitting anything to him was dangerous. But standing there in the dappled sunlight, with frost melting on the ground, and his smile making her chest ache with something she couldn't name, Victoria found she didn't want to lie. Not about this. Perhaps, she said softly. I find them less tedious than I expected. His smile widened. High praise from Hannah of the Vale. The name, the false name, the performance name, jarred her back to reality, reminded her that this wasn't real. Couldn't be real. He was playing a game, dismantling her defenses for reasons she still didn't fully understand, and she was foolish enough to be enjoying it. I really should return, she said, and this time her voice was steady. Before people talk. People are already talking. But he offered his arm. Allow me to escort you back. Properly. She hesitated. Physical contact, even this formal kind, felt like crossing yet another line. But refusing would create more suspicion, more questions. So she placed her hand on his arm and tried to ignore the way heat radiated from him, even through layers of fabric and coat. They walked back in silence. But it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of strangers. It was the weighted quiet of two people thinking too much, feeling too much, balancing on the edge of something neither could afford to acknowledge. When they reached the manor's entrance, James stopped, covered her gloved hand with his briefly, a gesture so quick anyone watching would miss it, but Victoria felt it like a brand. Tomorrow, he said. Same time. It wasn't a question, but Victoria found herself nodding anyway. Tomorrow. She fled inside before she could examine why that promise felt less like surrender and more like anticipation. Chapter 5. The house party reached its halfway point with a grand ball. Victoria had successfully avoided every previous evening entertainment, pleading headaches, fatigue, any excuse that allowed her to remain in her rooms. But this was different. This was the social centerpiece of her father's carefully planned gathering. And her father had made abundantly clear that her absence would not be tolerated. So Victoria descended the stairs in her black morning dress, because it matched the veil, because it completed the tragic picture she'd painted, and entered the ballroom like a ghost at her own funeral. The space glittered with candlelight and crystal. Music swirled through air thick with perfume and ambition. Couples moved across the floor in practiced waltzes, while others clustered at the edges, gossiping behind gloved hands and painted fans. Victoria found her usual corner, waited for the evening to pass, counted minutes like a prisoner marking days on a cell wall. Dance with me. She knew his voice without looking. James stood beside her, hand extended, expression unreadable. I don't dance, Your Grace. James, he didn't lower his hand. And that wasn't a request. I can't. You can. His voice dropped lower, for her ears only. Or are you going to let this veil control your entire existence, dictate what you can and cannot do, who you can and cannot be? The words struck deeper than he could possibly know, because that was exactly what the veil had become. Not protection, but prison. Not safety, but slow suffocation. And some part of her, the part that had laughed at his dry observations and quickened at his proximity, rebelled against it. People will stare, she whispered. Let them. They'll talk. They're already talking. Dance with me anyway. It was madness. It violated every rule of her carefully maintained invisibility. But Victoria found her hand moving toward his, found herself allowing him to lead her onto the floor, found herself caring less about propriety than about the warmth of his palm against hers, even through their gloves. The waltz began. James's hand settled at her waist, proper, appropriate, and yet sending heat radiating through her entire body. His other hand held hers with gentle firmness, and then they were moving, and Victoria remembered why she'd loved dancing before the veil, before the hiding, before 3 years of making herself small and quiet and forgettable. You're good at this, James observed. I had lessons before. She caught herself. When I was younger. Before the tragic accident that disfigured you. His tone was neutral, but she heard the question beneath it, the doubt. Yes. Tell me about it. This accident. Victoria's steps faltered. He steadied her immediately, his grip tightening just enough to keep her balanced. They were in public, surrounded by watching eyes, and yet somehow his questions felt painfully intimate, unavoidable. I don't like to speak of it. I'm sure you don't. Maintaining consistent details in a fabricated story must be challenging. Her breath caught. You're cruel. I'm honest. They turned, his lead flawless, and Victoria realized he was steering them toward the terrace doors, toward privacy, toward dangerous territory. Which is more than I can say for you, You don't know. I know you dance beautifully. I know your voice changes when you forget to whisper. I know your hands are trembling right now, and it has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the same thing currently setting my blood on fire. They'd reached the doors. He guided her through them onto the terrace without breaking rhythm. I know you're not disfigured, Victoria. I know you're hiding, and I'm done pretending I don't know. The night air hit her like cold water. The terrace was mercifully empty, the other guests still entranced by the ball inside. Music drifted through the open doors, muffled and distant. They stood in shadow, and Victoria felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her veil. You're wrong, she said, but her voice shook. Then prove it. He was still holding her, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, as though they were frozen mid-dance. Show me. If I'm so wrong, if you're truly hiding scars and tragedy, show me and I'll never question you again. And if I refuse, then I'll know I'm right. And I'll tell your father exactly what I suspect. The threat hung between them. Victoria's mind raced, searching for escape, for options, for any possible way out of this impossible choice. But there was nothing. He had her cornered, and they both knew it. Why? The word came out broken. Why does it matter to you? What possible reason could you have for pursuing this? Because you're the first real thing I've encountered in years. His voice was rough. Because I'm so utterly tired of performances and pretense and people being whatever they think I want them to be. Because when I look at you, even hidden beneath that veil, I see someone genuine struggling to break free, and He stopped, drew a sharp breath. I want to know her. The real you. Not this ghost you've created. His words shouldn't affect her, shouldn't reach past all her carefully constructed defenses and touch the lonely, terrified part of her that just wanted to be known. But they did. They reached in and grabbed her heart and squeezed until she couldn't breathe. You'll be disappointed, she whispered. The real me is nothing special. Let me be the judge of that. His hand moved, slowly, deliberately, up from her waist to her face. His fingers touched the edge of her veil and Victoria's entire body went rigid. One gentle tug. That's all it would take. One movement, and 3 years of hiding would evaporate. Don't, she breathed. Please don't. Give me a reason. His fingers stayed frozen at the veil's edge. One real reason why you're hiding. Not lies about accidents or disfigurement. The truth, Victoria. The truth. The truth was complicated and frightening and desperate. The truth was, her father seeing her only as a commodity to be sold. The truth was men who had looked at her with predatory interest before she learned to make herself invisible. The truth was terror of losing control, of being forced into a marriage that would turn her into property, of disappearing into someone else's will and never finding herself again. I don't want to be married, she said finally. I don't want to be traded like livestock to the highest bidder. I don't want to spend the rest of my life being what some man expects me to be. The veil. It was the only way to make them stop looking, stop wanting, stop trying to claim me. The words rushed out, urgent and honest and more vulnerable than she'd been with anyone in 3 years. She waited for judgment, for mockery, for him to call her foolish or selfish or ungrateful. Instead, James's hand dropped from her veil, returned to her waist, and he pulled her closer, so close she could feel his heartbeat through their layers of clothing. What if I'm not like them? His voice was low, intense. What if I don't want to claim you or control you or turn you into anything other than what you already are? Men always want that, she said, even when they think they don't. Then I'll prove you wrong. It sounded like a vow. I'll prove I see you, really see you, and respect what I see enough not to try to change it. Why would you do that? Because, he said, and there was something raw in his voice now, something that matched the ache in her chest. Somewhere in the last 5 days, this stopped being about curiosity and became about something far more dangerous. Victoria's breath caught. Dangerous? For both of us. His hand tightened at her waist. I came here to escape tedious society obligations. I stayed because you intrigued me. But now, he stopped. Now I find I can't stop thinking about you. About the woman beneath the veil. About what it would be like if you trusted me enough to let me see her. This was madness. Complete insanity. She barely knew him. Couldn't trust him. Shouldn't feel her heart racing and her chest aching and her body leaning into his warmth like she'd been cold her entire life. and he was the first fire she'd encountered. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "Probably," but he didn't pull away. "The question is whether it's a mistake you're willing to make." In the ballroom behind them, the waltz ended. New music began, something slower, more intimate. They should go back inside, should maintain propriety, should do anything except stay here in the shadows with his arms around her and truth hanging between them like something fragile and precious. "If I show you," Victoria heard herself say, "if I prove I'm not what you think, will you leave me alone? If that's what you want." A pause. Will you want that? She didn't know. That was the terrifying part. She didn't know if seeing his disappointment when he realized she was just an ordinary woman would be relief or heartbreak. Didn't know if his interest would survive the revelation of how utterly normal she was beneath all the mystery. "Give me time," she said, "to decide, to prepare." "How much time?" "I don't know. A few days. Until the house party ends. Until she had an escape route planned. Until she knew what his reaction would mean for her future." James studied her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Until the party ends, but Victoria," his voice dropped lower, "know that waiting is its own kind of torture. For both of us." He stepped back, released her. The sudden absence of his warmth felt like loss, and Victoria hated herself a little for feeling it. "We should go back inside," she managed. "Yes." But he didn't move, just looked at her with those winter-grey eyes that seemed to see everything she was trying to hide. "Tomorrow morning, our usual place." Not a question, never a question with him. But Victoria nodded anyway, because some part of her, some reckless, starving part, wanted tomorrow morning, wanted to see him again, wanted to dance this dangerous dance a little longer before everything inevitably shattered. They returned to the ballroom separately, properly, as though nothing had changed, but everything had changed. And Victoria spent the rest of the night pretending not to feel his eyes following her through the crowd, marking her every movement, reminding her with every glance that her time was running out. The countdown had begun, and she still had no idea whether she was being marched toward freedom or execution. 3 days remained until the house party's end, 3 days until Victoria's promised revelation. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold and inescapable. She barely slept anymore. When she closed her eyes, she saw James's face, the intensity of his gaze, the way his jaw tightened when she deflected his questions, the dangerous softness in his voice when he spoke her name. She replayed their conversations obsessively, searching for clues about how he would react when the veil finally came off. Would he be disappointed, angry at the deception, or worse, would he simply lose interest, the mystery solved, the challenge conquered? The morning of their scheduled walk, Victoria stood before her mirror longer than usual, studied her reflection with the clinical detachment of a stranger. Pale skin, clear blue eyes, delicate features that artists had once tried to paint, that men had once stared at too long. Pretty, she supposed, in a conventional, forgettable way. Nothing special. Nothing worth the intensity of attention James had been giving her veiled form. "You're going to tell him today, aren't you?" Martha asked from the doorway. "I can see it in the way you're looking at yourself, like you're saying goodbye." "I don't have a choice." Victoria's voice was flat. "He'll tell my father otherwise, and father will force the issue regardless. So you'll reveal yourself to save yourself." Martha moved closer, started helping with the veil. "And what then, miss? What happens when he sees you?" "Then it's over." Victoria closed her eyes against the sting behind them. "The mystery ends. He loses interest. I'm just another desperate young woman throwing herself at a duke. He returns to London. I return to whatever comes next. You don't know that he'll—" "I do know." The certainty ached. "Men like him don't actually want ordinary women, Martha. They want the chase, the puzzle, the conquest. Once I'm just Victoria Ashworth, unremarkable daughter of an unremarkable lord. He'll see exactly how foolish this whole thing has been." Martha's hands stilled on the veil. "And if you're wrong? If he stays?" The question hung in the air. Victoria didn't answer, couldn't answer, because some small, treacherous part of her hoped Martha was right, hoped that when James finally saw her face, he wouldn't flinch or retreat or realize his mistake. Hoped that maybe, impossibly irrationally, he'd meant what he said about seeing the real her. But hope, Victoria had learned, was the most dangerous indulgence of all. James was already waiting in the rose garden when she arrived. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, studying the frost-burnt flowers with apparent fascination. The morning sun caught in his dark hair, touched the severe lines of his profile, made him look almost softer than usual, almost vulnerable. "I wondered if you'd come," he said without turning. "I thought perhaps you'd decided to run instead." "I considered it." Victoria moved closer, each step feeling weighted, significant. "But I'm tired of running." Now he turned. Those grey eyes found hers, or found the veil at least, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or relief. "Then you've made your decision." It wasn't a question. He knew. Had probably known the moment she walked into the garden. Victoria drew a slow breath, steadying herself. "I have a condition," she said. His eyebrow rose. "You're in no position to negotiate." "Perhaps not. But I'm making one anyway." Her hands clenched in her skirts. "When I show you, when you see what I've been hiding, you'll leave immediately after. No questions, no explanations. You'll see me, and then you'll go. Return to London, and we'll never speak of this again." James studied her for a long moment. She couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he was angry or amused or something else entirely. Finally, he shook his head. "No." Victoria's breath caught. "What?" "I said no." He stepped closer. "I'm not agreeing to those terms. If you're finally trusting me enough to show your face, then I'm not disappearing the moment you do. That would defeat the entire purpose." "The purpose," Victoria said tightly, "is for you to satisfy your curiosity and leave me in peace. The purpose is for you to stop hiding." His voice gentled slightly. "And for me to prove that what's between us has nothing to do with mystery or veils or games, but I can't prove that if I run the moment you're vulnerable. I don't want your pity. Good, because you won't get it." He was close enough now that she could feel his warmth. "Whatever you think I'll see when that veil comes off, whatever ordinary or disappointing thing you've convinced yourself you are, you're wrong. And I'm going to stay right here and prove it to you." Tears burned behind Victoria's eyes. She blinked them back furiously. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." His hand rose slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, his fingers touched the edge of her veil. "Let me see you, Victoria, the real you, and let me show you that I'm not going anywhere." This was it, the moment she'd been dreading and somehow craving in equal measure. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands trembled. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to preserve the safety of her carefully constructed prison for just a little longer. But she was so tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of lying. Tired of being alone in a crowd, invisible behind fabric and fear. "All right," she whispered. "But James—" Her voice broke. "Please don't look at me differently. After. Please don't. Breathe," he said softly. "Just breathe." His fingers grasped the veil. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. The garden held its breath around them. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Then, with infinite gentleness, James lifted the veil. The fabric pulled away. Cool morning air touched Victoria's face, her real face exposed and vulnerable and terrifying. She kept her eyes closed, couldn't bear to see his reaction, couldn't watch the moment disappointment or indifference replaced whatever interest he'd shown her veiled form. Silence stretched. Seconds that felt like hours. Victoria's chest constricted. She couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think, could only stand there, exposed and waiting for the inevitable rejection. "Victoria." His voice was rough, strained. "Look at me." She didn't want to. But some part of her, the part that had always been reckless, that had danced with him on the terrace and traded honest words in shadowed gardens, couldn't resist. Her eyes opened slowly, met his, and stopped breathing entirely. Because James wasn't looking at her with disappointment, wasn't flinching or retreating or showing any sign of the reaction she'd expected. Instead, his eyes moved across her face with something that looked almost like reverence. His jaw was tight. His hands had clenched into fists at his sides as though he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "You're beautiful," he said finally, and his voice carried wonder, anger, relief. "You're absolutely beautiful, And you've been hiding this for 3 years because—" He stopped, shook his head. "God, Victoria, what were you so afraid of?" "This," she whispered. Her throat was tight. "Men looking at me like you're looking at me right now. Like I'm something to be possessed. I'm not—" He caught himself, drew a careful breath. When he spoke again, his voice was more controlled. "I'm looking at you like you're the answer to a question I didn't know I was asking." "That's different. Is it?" "Yes." He took a step closer. Close enough that she could see the variations of grey in his eyes, storm clouds and steel and something softer, warmer. "Because I don't want to possess you, Victoria. I want to know you. There's a difference." She wanted to believe him, wanted it with an intensity that frightened her. But 3 years of fear and self-protection couldn't be dismantled with a few pretty words, no matter how sincerely delivered. "You say that now," she managed, "but men always—" "I'm not other men." His hand rose again, hovering near her face, but not quite touching. A question. "May I?" Her breath caught. She should say no, should re-establish boundaries, should do anything except nod the tiny permission that emerged despite her better judgment. His fingertips brushed her cheek, feather-light, barely there. But Victoria felt it like electricity, like fire, like every nerve in her body suddenly waking after 3 years of forced sleep. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, the touch so gentle it made her chest ache. "Your skin is soft," he murmured. "And your eyes—" He stopped. "I imagined them 100 times, different colors, different shapes. But I never imagined this exact shade of blue, like summer sky, like—" "Please don't," Victoria whispered. "Don't make it about how I look." His hand stilled. "What should I make it about?" "I don't know." The honesty escaped before she could stop it. "But not that, because that's what everyone makes it about. And then I stop being a person and become a thing, something to acquire." James's expression shifted, hardened. "Who hurt you?" The question was quiet, dangerous. "What men looked at you in a way that made you believe you had to disappear to survive?" "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." The intensity in his voice made something crack in Victoria's chest. She'd spent 3 years convincing herself that nobody cared, that she was alone in her fear, that hiding was the only rational response to a world that saw her as commodity rather than person. But James was looking at her now with something that went beyond interest or attraction, something that looked almost like protective fury on her behalf. "Lord Winters," she heard herself say. "2 years before I started wearing the veil, he cornered me in the library during a party, told me that beauty like mine was wasted on innocence, that he could teach me." She stopped, the memory still turning her stomach. "My father walked in before anything happened, but instead of being angry at Winters, he was angry at me, said I'd been too friendly, too encouraging, that I needed to be more careful about the signals I sent." James's jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump. "Your father blamed you. He said beauty was a responsibility, that if men desired me, it was my obligation to manage that desire appropriately." The words tasted bitter. After that there were others, not all as aggressive as Winters, but watching, always watching. And my father started talking about marriage, about advantageous matches, about how my face could secure the family's future. "So you erased it," James said quietly. "Made yourself invisible rather than be seen as property." "Yes." The relief of confession flooded through her. "The veil was supposed to be temporary, just until the attention died down. But then I realized—" She stopped. "I realized I could breathe again, could exist without being evaluated constantly, without men looking at me and seeing only what they wanted to take." For a long moment, James said nothing. His hand had fallen from her face, but he hadn't stepped back, hadn't retreated. He just stood there looking at her with those storm-grey eyes that seemed to see past every defense, straight into the frightened, furious heart of her. "I understand," he said finally. "Why you hid. Why you built this fortress around yourself. I understand, Victoria, but—" His voice gentled. "You can't live in hiding forever. Eventually you'll suffocate in your own protection. Better than being consumed by someone else's desire." "Is it?" The question was genuine. Is existing without living really better? Is safety worth never being known? Victoria had no answer, because until 5 days ago, she would have said yes, absolutely. But now, standing here with her face bare and James looking at her like she was precious rather than prey, she wasn't certain anymore. "I don't know," she whispered. "Then let me help you find out." He extended his hand. An offering, not a demand. "Come with me. Not back to the manor. Not back to performances and pretense. Just with me. For a few hours, let me show you what it's like to be seen without being hunted." Everything rational in Victoria screamed to refuse. This was dangerous, reckless, exactly the kind of situation she'd spent 3 years avoiding. But some deeper part of her, the part that had danced with him and traded truths and felt more alive in 5 days than in 3 years of hiding, reached for his hand before fear could stop her. His fingers closed around hers. Warm, steady, real. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Does it matter?" She thought about that, realized with sudden clarity that it didn't. That for the first time in years, she trusted someone enough to follow without demanding destination or control or certainty. "No," she said softly. "It doesn't matter." James smiled then, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Good. Then trust me. Just for today. Let me prove I see you, Victoria, the real you, and that what I see is worth knowing." He led her away from the manor, through the gardens and into the wooded paths beyond, and Victoria followed, her face bare to the morning sun, her heart pounding with terror and anticipation, stepping into the terrifying unknown of being truly, completely seen. They walked for nearly an hour, leaving the manicured grounds of the estate behind for wilder territory. The path narrowed, became rougher, wound through ancient trees and alongside a stream that sang over smooth stones. James didn't speak, just kept her hand in his and guided her forward with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Victoria's initial panic had settled into something calmer. Wonder, maybe. The sensation of cool air on her face was strange after 3 years of fabric barriers. The sun felt different touching her skin directly. Even her breathing seemed easier, fuller, as though the veil had been restricting more than just visibility. "There," James said finally, pointing ahead. The trees opened onto a small clearing. In the center sat a stone cottage, clearly abandoned, its roof partially caved and walls overtaken by climbing ivy. But it was beautiful in its decay, romantic almost, like something from a painting. "I found it 2 days ago," James explained, leading her closer, "when I needed to escape the tedium of tea and gossip. Nobody's been here in years. It's completely private." Private. The word should have triggered alarm. Instead, Victoria felt only curiosity. She trusted him. Somehow, impossibly, she trusted him not to use their solitude for anything she didn't want. "Why bring me here?" she asked. "Because I wanted you somewhere you didn't have to perform, where no one's watching or judging or expecting anything." He released her hand, moved to brush away some of the ivy from the doorway. "Where you could just be." The simplicity of it, the thoughtfulness, made Victoria's chest tighten. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He glanced back at her. "I know you've been suffocating. I know you need space to remember who you are without the veil. I thought—" He stopped. "I thought maybe this could be that space. For a few hours at least. She should question it, should maintain suspicion." But standing there in the dappled sunlight, looking at this man who'd somehow seen past every defense she'd erected, Victoria found she didn't want to question anything. She just wanted to exist, to breathe, to feel something other than fear for the first time in 3 years. "Thank you," she whispered. They spent the morning exploring the cottage's remains. The interior was surprisingly intact, dusty and filled with abandoned furniture, but structurally sound in the parts where the roof still held. James found an old blanket, shook it out, spread it on the cleanest patch of floor. They sat together, not quite touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. "Tell me something true," James said after a comfortable silence. "Not about the veil or your father or any of that. Something about you, the real Victoria." She considered. There was so much she'd buried along with her face, so many pieces of herself she'd filed away as incompatible with the performance of tragic invalid. "I wanted to travel," she said finally. "Before all this, I wanted to see places beyond England, Paris, Rome, places I'd only read about in books. My father said it was impractical for a young woman, that my duty was to marry well and secure the family's position. And what did you say? Nothing. The admission hurt. I said nothing because I learned early that my wants didn't matter, only my usefulness. James's expression darkened. Your father is a fool. He's practical, there's a difference. No. His voice was firm. There isn't. Treating your daughter as a commodity to be traded is cruelty, not practicality. He shifted slightly, angling toward her. What else? What else did you want before you learned to stop wanting? The question opened something in Victoria. Words spilled out, dreams and desires she'd locked away, interests she'd suppressed, the person she might have been if fear hadn't taught her to make herself small. She told him about books she loved, music that moved her, arguments she wanted to have about philosophy and politics, and whether art had moral obligations. She talked until her voice grew hoarse, and she realized hours had passed without her noticing. And James listened, really listened, didn't interrupt or dismiss or redirect. Just sat there absorbing every word like it mattered, like she mattered, like knowing her was something worth the investment of time and attention. Your turn, Victoria said finally. Tell me something true about you. What do you want to know? Why you're here, really here. Not the surface reason, avoiding tedious obligations. The real one. James was quiet for a long moment. His gaze moved to the broken window, to the trees beyond, anywhere but her face. Victoria waited. She'd learned patience in her years of hiding, learned that silence could extract truths that questions couldn't. I'm tired, he said finally. Tired of being the Duke of Thornfield instead of just James. Tired of people seeing my title and my fortune instead of me. Tired of women throwing themselves at me for position while having no interest in who I actually am. He looked back at her. When I saw you in that drawing room, hidden, refusing to participate in the social games everyone else was playing, I thought maybe you understood what it's like to be seen as something you're not. I do, Victoria said softly. Understand, I mean. I know. His hand found hers on the blanket, covered it gently. That's why I couldn't leave you alone. Because for the first time in years, I met someone who might actually see me. Not the Duke. Not the title or the power or the strategic alliance. Just me. The vulnerability in his voice matched the ache in her chest. They were both hiding, Victoria realized, both protecting themselves from a world that wanted to use them rather than know them. The methods were different, her veil, his cold distance, but the fear underneath was the same. I see you, she whispered. James. Not your Grace. Not the Duke. You. His fingers tightened around hers. And I see you, Victoria. Not Hannah. Not the ghost. You. They sat like that as afternoon light shifted across the cottage floor, hands joined, both of them breathing easier than they had in years. No performances, no pretense. Just two people who'd found each other in the midst of their respective prisons and decided, however briefly, to be real. We should go back, Victoria said eventually, though she didn't move, before people notice we're missing. Let them notice. But James stood anyway, helped her to her feet. Though perhaps we should return separately. Protect your reputation. What reputation? Victoria smiled slightly. I'm the girl who hid behind a veil for 3 years. My reputation has been thoroughly destroyed already. Then we walk back together. He kept her hand, scandalously, defiantly, exactly as we are. And they did. Walked back through the woods with her face bare and their hands joined. And Victoria felt something like freedom for the first time since she was 16 years old. Their return caused exactly the scandal Victoria expected. Whispers followed them through the manor. Eyes tracked their progress. By dinner, the entire house party was buzzing with speculation about her unveiled face, about the Duke's obvious attention, about what had happened during their hours alone. Victoria sat at dinner without her veil. The decision had been terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Every instinct screamed to hide again, to retreat into the safety of fabric and shadows. But James sat across from her, and every time panic threatened, his eyes found hers with steady reassurance. Miss Ashworth, Lady Pembroke said with barely concealed glee, what a transformation. We had no idea you were so recovered. I'm not recovered, Victoria said clearly. I was never injured. I was hiding. There's a difference. Shocked silence rippled through the table. Her father's face turned red. James's expression remained carefully neutral, but she saw approval in his eyes. Hiding? Lady Pembroke's fan fluttered. Whatever from? From men who see women as acquisitions rather than people. Victoria met the woman's gaze steadily. From a society that values beauty over intelligence and marriageability over autonomy. From my own father's ambitions for my future. She turned to her father. I apologize for the deception, but I don't apologize for protecting myself. Her father looked ready to explode. Victoria, this is hardly appropriate. Neither is trading your daughter like livestock, James interjected calmly, which, if I'm understanding correctly, was precisely Lord Ashworth's intention. The table erupted. Some people defended her father's right to arrange his daughter's marriage. Others whispered about the scandal. A few brave souls actually murmured agreement with Victoria's position. But through it all, James's attention never wavered from her face, anchoring her through the storm she'd unleashed. Dinner ended in chaos. Victoria escaped to the terrace, needing air, needing space from the judgment and fascination of people who'd ignored her for 3 years and now couldn't stop staring. James found her there minutes later. That was brave, he said, joining her at the railing. Also possibly reckless. Your father looked ready to commit murder. He can try. Victoria's hands gripped the stone. I'm done hiding, done performing. If that makes me scandalous or inappropriate, so be it. Good. He moved closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she felt his warmth in the cool evening air. Though you realize this complicates things considerably. What things? My courtship of you. Now everyone's watching, expecting either spectacular success or devastating scandal. Victoria's breath caught. For you still want to... She couldn't finish the question. Court you? Yes, emphatically yes. He turned to face her fully. Did you think seeing your face would change that? Make me suddenly lose interest? I thought maybe the mystery was what intrigued you. That without it, I'm even more certain. His voice dropped lower, became intimate despite the public setting. Because now I know for sure that what I feel has nothing to do with veils or games or curiosity. It's you, Victoria. The brilliant, furious, frightened woman who built a fortress around herself and then had the courage to tear it down. That's what intrigues me. That's what's kept me awake every night this week. Her heart hammered. James, I'm not asking for an answer tonight, he interrupted gently. I'm not proposing or demanding or trying to claim you. I'm just telling you the truth. That I see you. That I admire you. That, given the choice between 100 veiled mysteries and one honest moment with the real Victoria Ashworth, I'd choose you every single time. Tears burned behind Victoria's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like this, as though she was valuable beyond her face, as though knowing her was a privilege rather than a conquest. I don't know how to do this, she whispered, how to trust this, how to believe it's real. Then let me prove it. His hand rose slowly, cupped her face with infinite gentleness. Let me court you properly, not in secret, not in hiding, out in the open where everyone can see that I choose you, that I want to know every part of you, and that I'm willing to wait however long it takes for you to trust that it's real. Why? The question escaped broken. Why me? You could have anyone, someone easier, less complicated, less damaged. You're not damaged, he said fiercely. You're a survivor. And I don't want anyone else. I want the woman brave enough to hide when the world became unbearable, and even braver when she decided to step back into it. I want the woman who argues about philosophy and dreams about Paris, and refuses to be reduced to her appearance. I want you, Victoria, exactly as you are. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at him through the dim terrace lighting and feel her entire world restructuring itself around this impossible moment. Say yes, James urged softly. Let me court you, give us a chance. Every rational thought Victoria possessed screamed warnings. It was too fast, too risky, too much exposure after 3 years of protection. But standing there with his hand warm against her face and his eyes holding nothing but honest regard, rationality felt less important than the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of being truly known. Yes, she whispered. Yes, court me. But James... Her voice strengthened. If you hurt me, if this is some game or conquest or it's not... His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. I swear to you, Victoria, this is real. I'm real. And I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to leave. Then, slowly, giving her time to retreat, to refuse to maintain distance, he leaned closer. His lips brushed her forehead. Gentle, chaste, a promise rather than a claim. Victoria's eyes closed. Her hands rose to grip his coat, needing something solid to keep her grounded while her entire world spun. This was happening. This was real. Someone saw her, really saw her, and hadn't looked away. "Thank you," she breathed against his chest, "for seeing me, for not—" "Shh." His arms came around her carefully. "You don't have to thank me for basic human decency, though the fact that you feel you do tells me exactly how badly the world has treated you." They stood like that as stars emerged overhead, wrapped in each other's warmth, both of them breathing easier than they had in longer than either could remember. The house party had 3 days remaining. 3 days for Victoria to learn how to be seen. 3 days for James to prove his constancy. 3 days before they'd both have to return to the real world and decide whether this fragile, precious thing between them could survive beyond the protective isolation of the estate. But for tonight, wrapped in his arms with her face bare to the stars, Victoria allowed herself to hope. And hope, she was learning, might be the bravest thing of all. The final days of the house party passed in a blur of carefully managed scandal. Victoria's unveiled appearance and James's obvious courtship dominated every conversation. Some guests were scandalized, others found it romantic. Her father alternated between fury and calculating approval, angry at her deception, but pleased by the Duke of Thornfield's interest. James was relentless in his attention. He walked with her every morning, sat beside her at every meal, engaged her in conversations that challenged and intrigued her, made it abundantly clear to everyone present that his interest was serious and his intentions honorable. And slowly, gradually, Victoria learned to breathe without her veil. The night before the party's end, James found her in the library. She'd retreated there after dinner, needing a moment alone with the books that had been her companions through 3 years of isolation. "Hiding?" he asked, settling into the chair beside hers. "Thinking." Victoria closed the book in her lap. "Tomorrow everyone leaves. We return to real life. And She stopped. "I don't know what happens next." "What do you want to happen?" "I want—" The words caught. "I want this to be real. Want you to mean what you've said. Want to believe that tomorrow doesn't change anything." "It won't," James said firmly. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere." "You say that now. But when we're back in London, when you're surrounded by suitable women who didn't spend 3 years lying to everyone—" "Victoria," he took her hands, "listen to me. I'm going to court you properly, call on you, take you driving in Hyde Park where everyone can see. Escort you to operas and balls and whatever social tortures you desire. I'm going to prove to you and everyone else that this isn't temporary fascination. It's—" He stopped. "It's more. Significantly more." Her heart stuttered. "How much more?" "The kind of more that terrifies me," he admitted, "because I've never felt this before. Never wanted to know someone the way I want to know you. Never imagined myself content to spend hours talking about books and philosophy and nothing of consequence. Never." His grip on her hands tightened. "Never thought I'd meet someone who looked at me and saw just James, who didn't want my title or my fortune or my influence, who just wanted me." "I do," Victoria whispered. "Want you, just you. But James, I'm frightened. What if I'm lying? What if I disappoint you? What if this falls apart?" He pulled her closer. "Those are valid fears, but hiding from them means never knowing what we could be. And I believe we could be extraordinary." "How can you be so certain?" "Because in 5 days you've made me feel more alive than I've felt in 5 years. Because talking with you is more engaging than anything else I've experienced. Because—" He stopped, drew a careful breath. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Victoria. And I think you might be falling too." The words hung between them, massive, terrifying, impossibly true. "I am," she admitted, her voice shaking. "Falling. It's completely irrational. We barely know each other. It's too fast, too reckless, too real," he finished. "It's real, and yes, it's terrifying. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe with anyone else." Victoria's eyes burned. "What if I'm not strong enough for this? What if I retreat back into hiding because being seen is too hard? Then I'll wait in the shadows with you until you're ready to try again." His hand cupped her face. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Victoria. I'm just asking you to try, to trust me enough to take this risk." She looked at him through the library's dim lighting. This man who'd seen past every defense, who demanded truth when lies would have been easier, who looked at her now with something so tender it made her chest ache. "I'm saying yes," she whispered, "to courtship, to trying, to—" The words stuck in her throat, but she forced them out anyway. "To loving you, even though it terrifies me." James's expression transformed. The careful control he usually maintained cracked, revealing something raw and relieved beneath. "Say that again." "I love you." Stronger this time. Surer. "I love you, James Blackwood. Not the Duke. You. The man who saw me when I was invisible, who demanded I stop hiding even when hiding felt safer. Who—" He kissed her. Not gentle like before. Not chaste. This was need and relief, and 3 years of isolation breaking apart against 5 days of connection. His mouth moved against hers with careful intensity, one hand cradling her face while the other pulled her closer. Victoria gasped into the kiss, her hands fisting in his coat, her entire body responding to the contact with a desperation that 3 years of careful control couldn't suppress. "Victoria," he breathed against her lips, "tell me to stop. Tell me this is too much, too fast, and I'll—" "Don't stop." She pulled him back. "Please don't stop." So he didn't. He kissed her until they were both breathless and shaking, until the library spun around them, and nothing existed except the press of his mouth and the heat of his hands, and the overwhelming sensation of being wanted, not for her face, but for herself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably apologize for that," he said, his voice rough. "That was hardly proper courting behavior." "I don't want proper." Victoria's hands hadn't released his coat. "I want real." And that felt real. It was. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. Devastatingly real. "And tomorrow, when I leave this estate, I'm taking that reality with me. I'm going to court you so thoroughly that all of London will know my intentions. I'm going to prove to you that this isn't temporary fascination. And when enough time has passed that you trust it, trust me, I'm going to ask you to marry me." Her breath caught. "That's quite presumptuous." "It's honest." His thumb brushed her lower lip. "I know what I want, Victoria. And I want you, not hidden, not performing, just you, every complicated, brilliant, frightened part of you, for the rest of my life." Tears spilled over. Victoria didn't try to stop them. "I don't know how to do this. How to be loved, how to trust it. Then we'll learn together." He kissed her forehead gently. "One day at a time. No pressure, no demands. Just 2 people choosing each other over and over until it stops feeling scary and starts feeling inevitable." "Inevitable," she repeated softly. "I like that." "Good." He stood, helped her to her feet. "Now come. Let me walk you to your rooms before someone discovers us here and creates a scandal even I can't smooth over." They walked through the quiet hallways, hand in hand. At her door, James stopped, kissed her once more, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Tomorrow," he said. "And every day after." "Tomorrow," Victoria agreed. She entered her rooms floating. Martha took one look at her face and smiled. "So it's real then," the maid said. "You and the Duke." "It's real." Victoria touched her lips, still feeling the imprint of his kiss. "Martha, I think I'm going to marry him." "I think you are too, miss. And I think you'll be happy." For the first time in 3 years, Victoria believed happiness was possible. Not the safe numbness of hiding. Not the careful control of performance. Real happiness, the messy, terrifying, exhilarating kind that came from being fully seen and loved anyway. She slept that night with her face bare to the moonlight streaming through her window. No veil, no pretense. Just Victoria Ashworth, choosing courage over safety, love over isolation, truth over the comfortable lies that had kept her alive but not really living. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Her father would have opinions. Society would gossip. There would be obstacles and complications, and 1,000 reasons to retreat back into hiding. But James would be there, steady and certain, and refusing to let her disappear. And that, Victoria decided, was worth any risk. 6 months later, London was ablaze with spring. Victoria stood in the drawing room of the Duke of Thornfield's townhouse, soon to be her townhouse as well, and marvelled at how much her life had transformed. The courtship had been everything James promised: relentless, public, unmistakably serious. He'd called on her daily, taken her to museums and operas, introduced her to his friends, real friends, not social climbers, who'd welcomed her without judgment. Slowly, carefully, he'd shown her what it felt like to be valued for her mind rather than her face, to be chosen rather than claimed. Her father had been difficult, of course, furious about the deception, demanding explanations she didn't owe him, but James had been immovable. He'd made it clear that Victoria's father would treat her with respect, or have no access to her or James's considerable influence. Faced with that ultimatum, Lord Ashworth had capitulated, grudgingly, but completely. "You look thoughtful," James said, entering the room and immediately moving to her side. 6 months together, and he still made her heart race, still looked at her with that intensity that said she was the most fascinating person in any room. "I was thinking about the house party," Victoria admitted, "about how terrified I was, how certain I was that showing my face would destroy everything. And instead it saved everything." His arms came around her from behind. "Saved us." "Saved me," she corrected softly. "I was dying in that veil. Slowly. I didn't even realize it until you made me take it off." "You made yourself take it off," James said firmly. "I just gave you a reason. The courage was yours." She turned in his arms, looked up at this man who'd demanded her truth and then treasured it, who'd proposed 3 months into their courtship, not because it was expected, but because he'd said he couldn't imagine waiting any longer to make her his in every possible way, who looked at her now on the eve of their wedding, like she was precious beyond measure. "I love you," she said. Simple, true, no longer frightening. "I love you." He kissed her softly. "My brilliant, brave Victoria. No more veils, no more hiding." "No more hiding," she agreed. The wedding was tomorrow. Small, intimate, exactly what they both wanted. Victoria would wear blue, that summer sky blue that matched her eyes, would walk down the aisle with her face bare and her heart open, would marry the man who'd seen her when she was invisible and loved her when she was exposed. She pretended to be ugly for 3 years to avoid marriage, but in the end, the right man had seen through her lie, had looked past fabric and fear straight into her soul, had chosen her, the real her, the complicated, damaged, beautiful her. And together, they'd built something neither had known to look for, something real and honest and entirely their own. No more ghosts, no more performances, just 2 people who'd found each other in their respective prisons and chosen freedom together. The veil was gone. But Victoria, the real Victoria, had finally been found, and she'd never been more visible, more alive, more completely, perfectly herself. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. This story of deception, courage, and finding love in truth is just the beginning. More tales of forbidden romance, dangerous dukes, and women brave enough to claim their own destinies are coming soon.
I wore the weight of every gaze, like chains I never chose. If hiding kept me safe from love, and hiding's what I do. I became a story whispered low, a ghost that no one truly knew. I thought the dark was mercy, till I felt your eyes cut through. Behind the veil, I was surviving, but you saw the truth beneath. Not the lie I built to protect myself, but the woman I could be. You didn't touch, you didn't take, you waited, you believed, and suddenly the world felt different when you saw me. me. I told myself I wasn't